Okay, go ahead and you're gonna have to. It's like a special touch system that. Yeah, no, seriously. See, you have to like. Okay, see how it's like. Let him do it. There we go. All right. So what you're gonna see today is an updated version of a talk that we did in Europe. We did this talk in the Council of Europe in France, and I'm here with my partner in crime, which is Joe Zadeh, and Joe Zadeh is actually co-founder of Hack the Valley. So Joe was part of the. Is part of this. He was part of the co-creator. He was a co-creator of Hack the Valley. We did this. We started this like 2 years ago. So we do a lot of community work, and he was a participant in a hackathon that was done on Facebook. And there was a lot of data. He's going to explain to you about the use cases. Plus, he's going to explain to you some of the initiatives that we're pursuing. There will probably be a call to action today, and there will be a follow up for this. So basically, I'm gonna go over pretty quick on some things about the dark web because I didn't say it right. We're gonna speak about using deep learning to uncover dark web, malicious actors, and their close circle. So basically, here's a little explanation of the dark web. The dark web is basically what you access by a door, or it can be also a darknet as well. There are some P2P type of darknets, not to confuse deep web with dark web. Deep web is usually what's behind a paywall, behind forums that are private. Like anybody has ever been to hell.com? No? No? I mean, it's so impossible to get in. I've always been curious to see what is in the hell.com, right? So seriously, nobody has ever had the curiosity? Okay. They used to attack you with like JavaScript. You cannot come here. You cannot come here. And it was... I go all over and I'm like, I'm gonna go in there. So the surface web, obviously we all know the Google's, the Facebook, the Wikipedia, and then the deep web, which is what's behind the paywall or behind private networks, and then finally the dark web. The dark web is usually accessed by a door, which is the Onion router. A project that was created initially for a good objective, and that was to give oppressed journalists or people a way of bypassing firewalls, bypassing censorship, and communicating or seeing the external world. We will soon realize that unfortunately is not the case. The deep web, or the dark web, sorry, has turned into an absolute place for crime and some of the most horrible things that you can think of. It's unfortunate. It's still being used in many instances for good reasons, for freedom of speech, for revealing information, whistleblowing type of activity. But unfortunately, I would say the majority of it is illegal porn.
Word for hire.
Sorry?
Word for hire.
Yeah. I will go with that in a minute. I actually for this presentation, I took the time to try to find PG-13 screenshots, which we will see in a minute. So some of the dark web facts. It's part of the deep web, but not all of it. Accessible mainly via Tor, which is what they call it, Onion land. Not indexed by standard search engines. There is actually DuckDuckGo can search within the dark web. Facebook, I believe, has an onion site as well, and provides a level of anonymity acceptable for criminal operators. Heavily monitored and regulated by law enforcement actions. It has very low latency. I think we have a lot of veterans here. If you remember the internet in the 90s, it feels a lot like the internet in the 90s, like, you know, this raw HTML type of websites. And also there's a lot of business driven by cryptocurrency. So we have Bitcoin, Monero, Ethereum, Litecoin. Here's some of the noticeable items in the dark web. You can buy guns, you can buy stolen or fake identities, including citizenships. There are places where they actually show passports and everything. Drugs like nowhere, like seriously, drugs like nowhere. You can get any type of drug you want, have it shipped to you, super easy. Piracy, all kinds of piracy. Anything you can think of piracy, you can find it. Assassination and terrorism, part of it as well. And of course, the worst of the worst, which is sex offenders. Sex offenders, trafficking, and CP. CP stands for child porn. For those who are trying to, in the security industry, when somebody says CP, it means child porn. Child porn is the lowest and the most horrible crime possible. If you are a part of an ISP or a content company that provides some service of access, it's unfortunate, but at one point you may come across CP. And if you come across CP, make sure that your company has a policy for accidental exposure, right? Accidental exposure means you're doing your job and both. Something very horrible you saw. When I was at a very large internet provider, we had a policy. The policy was you write down, I accidentally exposed myself to this, and you deliver whatever machine was destroyed. That's it. This is a crime. It's a crime to keep those type of images or even see them. I had several conversations with law enforcement agents, and this is constantly monitored. If you're a research, eventually it will be very difficult if you're looking, because it's like they force it upon you, right? They lie to you and tell you about things in a forum, and then when you go, boof, then there's this stuff that's very hard to avoid. And there are great services which we partner with, by the way, that you should look at if you're doing this type of work. But make sure you have a policy for this. Usually the feds, I talk to the feds will tell me, if you unfortunately are doing your research work and you're exposed to it, we're not gonna prosecute. But if we see that you are constantly downloading this stuff or you're watching these videos, then yeah. Most of that stuff is also backdoor, and they're constantly in the hunt for these guys. But they have become clever as well. So here's some of the hidden services: violence, arms, social hacking. You can get like boutique hacking. They'll tell you, give me a Facebook account that you want hacked, and we'll get it for you. Give me an Instagram account that you want me to hack. If you go to 0 Day today, there are some 0 days for resetting passwords at Facebook and Instagram. I hope they fix it, but they are advertising them. Of course, illegal pornography, and then of course many other illicit and illegal things. Here's one of the vendors that we were able to partner with. It's called Dark Owl. And Dark Owl has indexed over 500 million sites across the entire dark web. The good thing about some of these services is that they sanitize, they just get metadata. And when I say sanitize, it's that you're not gonna see the pictures. They don't index pictures at all. But they do get the metadata, right? So some of we would like to thank them because they really help us doing this presentation. And they allow us to access some of that data in order to continue doing our research. So if you need some sort of a service, take a look at them. So like I was saying, here's an example of the dark web content. Those banners, it reminds me a lot of GIF Animator. Any of you use GIF Animator during the 90s? Make banners? Excellent, there you go. GIF Animator was the shit. So you would put a bunch of GIFs and it would look like an animated GIF. So we used to use it all the time. So here's how it looks like. It looks like you need low latency, plain HTML because the connection is slow. The door, the onion router, works by sending you through a series of layers, right? That's what they call it, onion. A series of layers of an animation. And usually that consists of switching IPs. And as you switch IPs, these connections are incredibly slow. And because the connections are incredibly slow, most of the sites you will not see like flashy or graph heavy. Also, obviously, because a lot of these guys are criminals, I don't think they want to hire anybody to do flashy stuff because they will be probably caught. Right? So this is how it looks like. Here's we were talking about passports. This is probably very hot right now. Here's citizenship for real US passports. Oh, I'll put it back. There you go. And of course, we had cryptocurrency, which unfortunately is a big enabler. I know many of you here are crypto fanatics. I've been in crypto since 2011, maybe 2012. I have friends that bought whoppers for 10, 12 Bitcoins back then. Somebody gave me 4 Bitcoins one time. 4 Bitcoins, do the number now. Do the number now, right? And then I bought at $4, and I thought I was gonna make a lot of money, so I sold it when it was $16. I completely missed the ball right there. So I lost a lot of money, right? I lost a lot of money. And recently, when I got divorced, by the way, I lost half of my crypto. The lawyer forced me to pretty much, you need to give away half of your crypto. So crypto is property. Oh yeah. So the cryptocurrencies, which is something very cool, and in my opinion, something that is inevitable. We recently saw the stable coins. Something will eventually stick. It's my opinion about cryptocurrency. There are challenges with the technology. There are challenges, obviously, with the ecosystem. There's too many criminals. That's, in my opinion, the biggest problem with the cryptocurrency you see. It's full of criminals. I believe that cryptocurrencies will eventually become mainstream, and we're going to use something crypto, and then the cash, the fiat, will go away. So the crypto is very popular on the dark web. Why? Because it provides a level of anonymity that is comfortable. I've done investigations of crypto. When I was at this internet provider, we got blackmailing and extortion all the time. And basically what the malicious actor would do is send you an email saying, here's a hash, here's a wallet, pay, or I'm taking you down. Or like Ivan was saying his last talk, oh, I got compromised. Compromise is usually they have something very embarrassing about you, or the target, and say, hey, I got compromised. Here's the wallet. If you don't pay, that's it, I'm publishing. You've seen it also in mainstream. When Ashley Madison happened, you remember Ashley Madison? It was a site for cheaters. It was popped. And then what they did is they grabbed onto the DB. They didn't even know these people probably. And started emailing them and said, hey, I got your pictures from Ashley Madison. I got your messages. and here's what you need to pay me, or I will send it to your wife or whatever. There may have been some pretexting in some cases. There was some chatter that there were even suicides because of this stuff. Right, so that goes back to what Sam was saying this morning. Don't trust any of these sites. Don't reuse your passwords because you never know.
Is the majority of cryptocurrency and the purchase thereof, it's mainstream now, right? It's not all on the dark web.
Yes, there's well, you had Coinbase, for example. We can go and buy crypto right now, and many Amazon, I think, takes BTC. I believe Amazon took at one point. So usually the biggest cryptocurrency right now is Bitcoin and Ethereum. Ethereum, I think, will prevail. I think Bitcoin has reached a point where its architecture may not escalate. But there are a number of what it's called highly or a higher level of anonymity currencies. Some of them are Zcash, Monero, and there's one more than Verge. Verge was going to be used at Pornhub, by the way, and somehow they believe that by using or tokenizing this type of cryptocurrency, then it will become more popular. What happens with a lot of these exchanges is they're shady and they steal crypto from their customers. I have, if you're in the Slack for the percent 27 Slack, you will see that there's constantly people complaining that they send one quantity, but there's another received. Then they can't tell them what happened in the middle. I mean, it's an entire, it's a racket, right? So unfortunately, the digital currencies are hard to track. Not really, Bitcoin can give you at one point a certain certainty who used it, but there are others that are much more, give you a higher level of anonymity. The thing about this, though, is that if you use Zcash, or if you use Verge, or if you use Monero, usually you're going to have to translate into a more mainstream cryptocurrency. So that means you're going to have to turn it into either Ethereum or BTC, and then cash it out. And that provides you what I call a choke point. So if you're following the trail, that's usually the highest level opportunity that you have to catch these people. There are other techniques and there are companies that do that, and I will get into that in a minute. So why Bitcoin is, here's the market cap, just so you know the way it was at the time I checked it. I think it's still around the same. So Bitcoin's around $6,000.
Stellar is higher.
Huh?
Stellar is higher.
It is higher?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So this, here's another, this is Silk Road 3, by the way. There's Silk Road 2, and then Silk Road 3. And this is Silk Road 3. I haven't checked as of today. They might have taken it down, right? But Silk Road, if you guys remember, it was a drug assassination, all kind of everything goes market. And the driver of this is cryptocurrency. Look. So, unfortunately, cryptocurrency is part of the equation. So if you're looking at this type of stuff, you have to look at the trail of the money, cryptocurrency. Another example, you guys remember Backpage?
Yeah.
Backpage was taken down. Backpage started taking crypto when all the credit card companies canceled them. By the way, I had the unfortunate opportunity to shake the hands of one of those guys because they used to own the New Times Media. And my ex-wife used to work for the New Times Media. So I saw them once in Miami and shook their hands. And I just saw them recently on I Am Day2, how they were created Backpage, right? Now I'm gonna give you just a little tangent. What they used to, the New Times Media is like a wrap, like a alternative, right? So my ex-wife used to tell me the most profitable part of the paper is the back page. And the back page, you know what the back page was? Escort apps. We're talking paper. We're talking paper.
Yeah.
right? Paper. There was no portal, there was nothing. And I remember she telling me, these guys don't hate the internet. They hate the internet because they want to sell paper. They end up selling New Times Media, I think it was, I don't remember who. And guess what they did afterwards? They created Backpage.com. It's a little piece of history of where this is coming. So this, along with the Backpage, actually, I think was part at one point of the data that was looked upon. They go together, unfortunately, because it gives the criminals a level of anonymity that is comfortable. So why cryptocurrency? Pretty quick. Because it's decentralized, it doesn't depend on banks, because it's anonymous, or at least it has a level of anonymity. It's not regulated, there are no limits in number of transactions, there are no limits in quantity, there's no formal tracking, and it's accepted worldwide. No borders, no oversight from government or international organizations. So human traffickers use cryptocurrency to avoid prosecution. The ClearNet surface web is showing crypto as payment form, like we thought. Here's, I think I just took this not too long ago. This is an escort site where it says right there, look, BTC. It actually takes you. Bitcoin now taken in at Bubbles, which is the business. They also use things called mixers. Mixers, basically you send the quantity and then they start sending it to multiple wallets. That way you can trace them. So they send it to multiple wallets and eventually it gets to a point. There are ways to discover that, by the way. I think we had we also have a partner and a person that presented here today in this conference, which is Victor Fenn. Victor Fenn is the CEO of AN Chain. There are ways of tracking cryptocurrency. There are ways of tracking origin and destination and providing attribution. I think, are you here,
Yeah.
Victor? Okay. Yeah, there you go. So there are two. One of them is, I forgot the name of the other company. Chain Analysis, which is mostly BTC, and then his, which does BTC and Ethereum. So there are efforts out there in the blockchain security to prevent this. So here's switching a little bit of why this is a huge problem. It's a market of 150 billion per year. That's human trafficking. At any given time in 2016, there was an estimated of 40 million people in modern slavery, including 24.9 million to forced labor and 50.4 million in forced marriage. Commercial sexual exploitation accounts for 99 billion of that total. Traffickers are driven by the level of anonymity that is provided at the dark web and with cryptocurrency. It's like, those are like some of the biggest ingredients. A lot of it obviously comes out in the surface because a lot of the consumers of this stuff are not technically savvy. So they tend to use the surface web, the ClearNet, right? Things like Craigslist, for example. But Craigslist is, I would say, is the tip of the iceberg. There's an entire organization in logistics that come from it, and a lot of it happens in the dark web.
So, Rob, just curious, do you know where the majority of the human trafficking comes from? Is it from Mexico or China or?
Well, it's definitely from third world countries. So I wouldn't be able to, have you guys ever landed in McCarran in Vegas, where there are the signs in the bathroom that says, if you are kidnapped or you're being trafficked or you're being victim of sexual abuse, please call this number. Have you ever seen it? Yeah, you can. Yeah, they're having it in Vegas. As soon as you land, I thought that was interesting. That in the bathrooms, for female and males, there are ads that said, if you believe you're being a victim of sexual trafficking, please call this number now.
It's all airports, really.
All airports now?
Atlanta has, Fort Lauderdale has.
Oh, okay, well. So like I said before, what you see in the ClearNet is the tip of the iceberg. There's an entire operation with that much money. So here's some of the flows of tracking cryptocurrency. Oh, there it is. It's a chain analysis and A in chain. A in chain, we have Victor if you have asking questions. We can also use machine learning and data-driven methods, which you're about to see. Basically, what we're looking for is patterns, establish entities, identify who's a producer, who's a consumer, and sort of the flow of communications may give you. It's almost sometimes I look at it like when you're looking at flow of traffic. When you have SSL, you can't see what is in it, but you can tell if you put analysis into it that something is going on. We also use obviously services that can do scraping, monitoring, indexing, and labeling. Labeling is very important. You can do this on your own. There's code out there that will allow you to scrape the dark web. Not easy though. Yeah.
I heard from a friend who works in a bank that the dark web is one of the source for DDoS attacks. Like there are people on the dark web.
Yes.
Botnets, yeah.
Botnets and stuff like that. But the dark web is mostly for logistics and operation. The real DDoS will come from ClearNet because you need bandwidth. There are usually two types of DDoS. Layer 3 or layer 7. So it's either volumetric. Volumetric is a fill up the pipe so nobody can look at your site. And application on layer 7 is, I'm just gonna download this PDF 10,000 times. Your server eventually says, I can't serve it anymore. Falls out. So at least for volumetrics, I would say, I can tell you this because we used to have what we call the brown list. In the brown list, it was a list of Tor nodes. So anything that will even come from Tor, it was blocked, it was denied. Of course, we were a DDoS provider, right? I'm not sure any entity can block it or not, but you're correct. So here's some of the, you were asking me, right, about the flow. So you can find this, by the way, in the human trafficking report. You can find that here. We took that from this. So we didn't obviously want to repeat the report, but we took some of it. And here's the some of the flow. As you can see, it's third world, right? Sub-Saharan Africa, Asia, South America. So I'm going to let Joe jump on this and speak about the data-driven security analytics.
Yeah, and just to kind of touch on your question a little bit more, I think what was sort of surprising for us to find out about kind of doing this research is that, like, we have the slide hidden, so you won't be able to see these. But basically, like, there's some graphics we were kind of playing with at one point that I just derived from this 2016 report, and it kind of goes into the statistics of where the different regions, where the motivating factors are, and what the distribution of people involved in different forms of human trafficking, how they're related to sort of the geography of the region. And it turns out, so in the Caribbean and some of these sort of third world places, there's really crazy things I never even knew about, victims of human trafficking are used for organ harvesting, for instance. But it turns out in the States and in Canada, in first world countries, where there's the most money, these are very prevalent places where forced marriage and sex trafficking happens. So the sex trafficking doesn't always happen in the third world where you think, because it's more profitable to move victims around and sell them to people who have the most wealth. So the first world is really more involved in this than I originally kind of assumed until I started kind of getting into the data. And that was kind of one of the shocking things, just learning about this from kind of a research and statistics perspective. And kind of now we'll just kind of get into some of the use cases of like what research kind of did to help with a hackathon initially, and then volunteer kind of just over the years on different problems related to this broad topic. So this is totally just volunteer projects. There's not a commercial incentive here, and one of the lucky things for us is Rod and me have been part of companies that are just kind of have enough maturity and are part of these bigger Silicon Valley and technological conglomerates that are kind of helping interact with NGOs, law enforcement. The first one we did was this, it's called the Facebook Child Safety Hackathon. It takes place every year at Facebook. And we basically sat down with a bunch of guys from a company called Thorn, and they gave us a data set that was phished by the FBI in collaboration with Thorn. And we'll kind of talk a little bit about what the nature of that data, but there's tons of places that are, a mix of government, industry, and places all over Silicon Valley. Particularly, we work with Splunk, Facebook, Uber, Amazon, and here's sort of the NGOs that have kind of over the years come into our lives, and there's some real fascinating people in the mix here. Orphan Secure is a group of like ex-Navy SEALs and FBI guys who will kick doors down and rescue kids from extreme circumstances. And it's just a story that kind of resonated with us. Rod and me got really good at kind of hunting malware and digital threat actors, and I think this just has a little bit more of a serious tone when you find when you help law enforcement kind of prosecute someone who's putting a child at risk. It just kind of has a different weight than catching a computer virus. And I think kind of one of the things that is sort of was just kind of interesting for me to learn about this problem is this kind of theme that there's certain kind of like issues and just research problems that will kind of manifest in society, and these problems are not. There's not an incentive for commercial organizations or industry to solve these problems. There's no financial incentive, and they also kind of are not at the scale of something that the government can spend a lot of money on. And it turns out like human trafficking in the States falls in this sort of weird kind of gray area where there's some local spend, but at the government level, the government's more cares about spending money against the war on terrorism, on sort of problems that have like a little bit different of a geopolitical scale. And so we kind of found human trafficking as this sort of gray area where it's just there's really needs to be a call to arms and kind of a grassroots sort of volunteer movement to kind of help get some of the work done here. And so that's kind of where we're at. There's a lot of interesting problems here. But there's no one that is going to be working on them unless it's sort of the community. And so that's kind of where one of the selfish reasons to even do this talk is just to kind of tell some more stories and say like every single person in this room could probably contribute in some way, a few hours on the weekend and just hacking, using skills that not only just computer security but a variety of different disciplines come into play. And here's kind of like Thorn's page. They use data scientists, researchers, technology providers, partner organizations. Like all these are sort of NGOs we've worked with that have sort of different kind of channels for volunteering. And some of the stuff is really fascinating when it comes to just like the type of technological problems that these companies are interested in solving. So if you're interested, just like. I think we'll have this, ping us for the deck and come talk to us afterward, but we got all kinds of links and resources we can throw your ways if you're kind of, just want to understand how you can help more on this problem. And like one of the, just another sort of like kind of statistic that kind of, for me sort of was like really, the first time I was starting to think, wow, like this problem affects way closer to home. Like I originally thought like human trafficking would take place in the third world, but this is the output of Thorn's technological project that's called Spotlight, and it helps sort of enable law enforcement to kind of take action on most prosecutable cases. And just I think this was in 1 year of time. These are the number of prosecuted cases per state involving like child sex trafficking. And I mean, we're in California. There's 4,000 cases of this in California alone, and it hits close to home, and it's crazy to think the scale these things really happen on. So why I like kind of just spending time on this problem just from a pure research perspective is there's a ton of different kind of challenges and sort of bleeding edge kind of techniques that can kind of come in and play a part in helping create a prosecutable evidence for taking action against someone who's putting like CP on the internet and taking pictures of kids or just doing any of this kind of crazy stuff. And just kind of maybe taking a grab bag of a couple of the best projects. I think one of the interesting things we'll talk about a little bit is the need to sort of triangulate and find as much context out of an image as possible in order to tell law enforcement this is the possible geolocation, or this is the possible area where this picture was taken, and this is where a kid could be held. So one of the things that helps a lot is background images and pictures that are scraped off the dark web in this context. So what will happen is these NGOs will scrape all these images, and then this application, for instance, is all about correlating the background image in hopes of telling us what hotel chain was this picture taken in. And like Interpol and international police investigations, like one of the first things they'll do if they have a set of digital evidence that's like CP and just images of children in crazy kind of like examples, they're gonna like the operators who are kind of sifting through that evidence are gonna look at things like the electrical outlet in the background of the picture to do the first layer of triangulation and just say like once they see an electrical outlet, Interpol can usually triangulate that to a country. And so these are sort of the basic kind of levels of context and layers of context that over time human operators kind of do manually, just by hand. And here's where sort of like machine learning and some of these techniques kind of come in to automatically sort of add the context that a human operator would do, would just do with their kind of naked eye.
I'm just curious, Joseph, like how, I know you mentioned if anybody in the room, could, be an advocate but how do they effectively do that without like exposing their own computer to porn and then getting busted potentially by, some FBI that's actually monitoring the dark web too?
Well, that happens a lot with any type of research. There's been many times where, not with images, but like certain botnets that, hey, you'll get a call, for example, say, hey, I noticed activity in this, can you please get out? Right? So that may happen, right? Many times law enforcement does not tell you, or will never tell you, even government will never tell you where they're at. As of, like I said before, how do you not get prosecuted? Well, are you downloading all that stuff? That's not your business. Are you looking at it to identify it? Well, that's different, right? They know patterns. They know, they sort of determine the behavior, they're compulsive, because many times these child predators are compulsive. Compulsive means they keep repeating. So there's a pattern of constantly grabbing images and downloading, and they can see it. They can see that. But if you're a researcher, they have told me, if you're a researcher, we can tell by what you're doing. But obviously, if you show a pattern, right, of that you are actually looking at it. Yeah, then they can use the law anytime to prosecute, by the way. Right. And it has nothing to do with child porn, guys. We have a person that was driven into suicide because he wrote a script that downloaded PDFs. that person is Aaron Swartz, right? He was prosecuted for it. So, yes, you can get prosecuted by anything, right?
Is today Aaron Schwartz Day?
Yeah, I think it was this weekend, by the way. Yeah. Sorry, you know.
No, shout out to Aaron Schwartz. This is, and that's actually a good question that will kind of lead in to some of the machine learning techniques we're going to use, because there's just different like best practices in extreme content. So one of the things we're going to talk about a little bit is hashing images. So when we what will happen usually in these kind of collaborations, like the one Rod and me worked on, is a collaboration between the FBI, an NGO, and researchers. And so there's already kind of the blessing of the FBI. Basically what they had to do was the FBI was tracking a forum that's known, like extreme content forum, mainly focused on like child pornography. And what they did was they had to pretend they were like a user that needed an account. They had to get an invite, so they had to prove they had content of their own. So the FBI already kind of created like a fish, got an account there, and then they gave the creds to the NGO, which set up a scraper. And that's where we kind of started. We'll kind of get into that data set. We have 6 months of forum posts from all people on this private fish forum. And kind of there's just like, when you kind of work in collaboration with law enforcement and stuff, there'll just be different rules of engagement. In this case, I think the data set they gave us, all the images were just removed entirely, as a pre-processing step. Other cases they'll basically give us a hash, so it's not actually the image, it's like a string representing the image. And then we'll do different things, like we'll talk about how we use these hashes in a few minutes, but it's kind of like a case-by-case basis in our experience on sort of how, it's more like how the collaboration is manifesting, and sometimes it's like the data set they gave us, they just handed it to us, and now we have 6 months of data. We can, there's no like contract or anything, but I was talking to a law enforcement official, and they were saying, as researchers, kind of like what Rod said, it's almost like they recognize like they're, who the white hats are and who the black hats are in this case a little bit more. There's definitely gray areas. But I think one of the things I've used personally is these hashing techniques and all, which I'll show you in a second. And just kind of like, we have a couple buzzwords thrown in these slides. What we're sort of talking about, some of the key kind of like, tactical use cases that we really sort of try to find a good use of kind of modern bleeding edge machine learning techniques is around image and text recognition. And this is really where kind of deep learning shines sort of as a great kind of example of some of the breakthroughs in these algorithms we hear a lot about in the news. This is sort of just a real kind of quick just sketch of sort of the difference between some of these buzzwords, but I think at a high level, we took this from like a blog post from our company. At a high level, like we talk philosophically about building, conscious machines, building intelligent artificial systems. This is sort of the broader kind of science and buzzwords around artificial intelligence. This can mean quite a bit of different sort of philosophy and what does it mean to make a computer conscious? Like these sort of kind of come at the highest level of sort of these artificial intelligence theories, and then kind of statistical learning or statistical machine learning or machine learning for short is more about kind of a subset of the theory of artificial intelligence that's really about tools and techniques that are meant for pattern recognition. In machine learning, there's a lot of different tools and techniques we can use. You might have used some that you didn't even know, like doing a statistical regression. Using a regression in Excel is an example of statistical learning. But there's sort of different use cases for different kind of reasons why you'll use a particular machine learning algorithm. And it turns out in the last decade or so, there's been some very big breakthroughs in these types of algorithms that are referred to neural network algorithms or deep learning in particular. And deep learning just kind of is a buzzword, but it's a buzzword that has some weight behind it, because one of the reasons why it's so powerful is it's the deep learning methods, particularly around image classification, which we'll talk about, and text translation and natural language processing. these are kind of state of the art in the sense that they beat all other known algorithms in the literature from an accuracy and metrics perspective. So it's kind of like best practices. That's why we chose deep learning for some of the use cases we'll talk about here. Mainly like image and some of the kind of post processing. We'll talk about a little architecture and kind of where we kind of tackle the image recognition stuff. And I think for me personally, as a data scientist over the last few years, what I kind of when I would work on like this is some GitHub code we had on a project that is about detecting the delivery of exploits in HTTP traffic. And this is all kind of code that we wrote based off kind of data Rod was generating, showing the data scientists, this is how I'm delivering a payload. This is what the statistics for the payload look like when we're running an exploit kit and a bunch of other things. And it turns out like when you spend enough time looking at all these data sets, you get some ideas for statistics, or data scientists would call these things, each line of these things, each line here is sort of a feature or a statistic or a column we're adding that's kind of giving us extra context or dimension around a particular like set of HTTP requests. So this is something I wrote by hand just over time, learning, and it's called the feature engineering or feature design part of kind of building a machine learning algorithm. And another thing I've seen change in my job using deep learning techniques is nowadays I don't even get to this step where I'm kind of thinking about a bunch of different statistics or features. The deep learning algorithm is going to figure that out itself. So this is sometimes called like automated feature learning. And it's just the nature of these learning architectures and these algorithms in particular that let us sort of bypass one of the more traditional kind of parts of the development lifecycle in kind of a classic data science. So another reason that deep learning is becoming very powerful, especially if you have a lot of compute, like something like a company like Google or Amazon, is that they just have so much compute and so much like processing power that they can just run data through this algorithm, and over time, this kind of thing that humans will be sort of teasing out by hand is going to be automatically learned by the algorithm. So that's kind of like so that's a very sort of high level kind of approximation to a lot of kind of complicated topics. But just come talk to us afterward if you want some kind of references. And this doesn't really do the deep learning conversation justice, but it's just kind of quick overview. And then so kind of now we'll just kind of get into our model a little. Like so kind of going back to this data set that is basically forum posts. It's like it looks like just anonymized forum posts. And what happens in these forum posts, because we were having about 6 months of communication through this community, that the majority of the people participating in the community in the forum are content consumers. They go on every day and they're looking for crazy pictures. They're not putting anyone out there. They're basically consuming the content. And then there's some other parts of this community that are kind of like auxiliary. There's like admin accounts. There's some other people that just don't interact, just kind of dead accounts. But kind of the things that law enforcement is really kind of interested in is the people that produce the content, and that's a very small subset of this community. And those are the kind of people that we're sort of building a model around to help sort of triangulate and add as much context into kind of what they're up to. And this, I thought this was a picture of the forum post. So this is actually a picture we used in a sort of a different problem for kind of a corporate modeling problem. So we would really model the behavior of different types of enterprise, sort of enterprise like directory, in terms of like these hypotheses. Like we got end users, we got backup accounts, we got admins. We kind of have this hypothesis on sort of the nature of the users, and we use some very similar techniques that we'll describe kind of for this dark web problem, also to model kind of just the different types of users in like enterprise active directory. And so that's where some from a research perspective, some of these kind of when you work on one problem, you'll see sort of analogs and parallels, and so we've kind of gone back and forth from the dark web to kind of just modeling LDAP data, and we've even used this to sort of apply different kind of group kind of hierarchies to how people write scripts in an enterprise. You can kind of find malicious PowerShell scripts by sort of modeling kind of what is typical for your group of admins. I think this is just some references for some of the different problems we were kind of exposing, and I think like the hash value stuff is something that I really sort of am passionate about, and we'll kind of walk you through some of these different examples of how hashing is used in general in image detection to really kind of like to help accelerate the problem of pattern matching images with computers. So kind of here's kind of the start of it all. So this is basically like based off like a paper, kind of like we have some statistical hypothesis that we're sort of overlaying on 6 months of forum interactions. And the hypothesis is that there's going to be a few people in this forum data that are of extreme importance, are the VIPs that we really want to target, get as much context as possible, and also kind of hope there's some operational security failures in their communications. So that's kind of like just looking for the low-hanging fruit is like, what did someone actually like put an email address in one of the chats? Did they put sort of identifiable information? And is there any way to do attribution, given the fact that we know who the VIPs are? The key things that we kind of use for this this type of model is basically taking the text data and turning it into a social graph, kind of like how you look at Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, how any of those sort of analytic engines look at their own data under the hood. The first step is really to create a graph of all the interactions in a way that is meaningful to do things like, how do I rank the most important node in my graph? How do I tell what are the connected components, and just different kinds of concepts that really sort of are borrowed from sort of classic graph theory and computer science. So one thing we use a lot in this kind of problem is something called PageRank. It's just a sort of a technique that Google pioneered to sort of take a graph of stuff and say like, what is the most important node in the graph? It could be a graph of the enterprise connections in Active Directory. It can be a graph of, in our case, we make the graph by every username in the forum is a node, and every @mention. So users at each other in this forum, and so every @mention is an edge to another user. And then over time, we can basically kind of use different techniques. Some of them are graph algorithms. Some of them belong to something we call natural language processing. And then the final kind of little piece of the algorithm is an image detection algorithm, which is specific to deep learning. The key kind of assumption we make here is that forum interactions are tightly linked to specific subgroups of the population. And that's kind of what I meant. There's a few VIPs that are basically producing the content here. The actual algorithm, we kind of list out the steps here. It's kind of like boring details, but we basically we take this raw data, the forum post, and we build a graph of basically nodes and edges using sort of this rule. @mentions are edges and usernames are nodes. And then we do a couple other techniques. I mean, there's a lot to sort of each algorithm that's kind of basically listed in the step. But the next thing is just sort of about natural language processing. And what happens is when you kind of create like you basically are able to aggregate all the information for a single username, and you could call this the user sort of full kind of like we would call it a document in this language, because it sort of fits into this thing we call a topic model. But we basically treat each user's full kind of interactions and all the text they use on the forum as a single document, and then we have to do a couple of things that are sort of call them just little tricks in natural language processing to remove words that aren't important, or it's called stemming and couple other tricks that basically reduce the vocabulary of the space down to something that's small enough dimension that makes the model kind of meaningful. And so what happens at the second step is this thing called a topic model. And the reason we kind of are doing that is we're sort of like building two things in parallel. We're building sort of this NLP picture of individual users' communications, and then we're also seeing like those communications in a broader social graph. And the NLP stuff comes in really important for the operational security fails. So when we sort of like reduce and throw away all the crud and get rid of all the stop words like at, the, is, her, him, we can kind of start seeing like little interesting artifacts. And if one of the VIP accounts in particular had a set of, had a sort of a vocabulary that is interesting enough for law enforcement to kind of correlate evidence to. The kind of the final steps in this stuff, like some of these things are kind of, and this isn't really like a linear set of steps. Some of these things are happening in parallel, but we have a graph. So what we do with the graph is build some metrics on it. That's what PageRank is. PageRank is basically going to take every single person or every single node in that graph, and it's going to give us a ranking. So I can say like, what is the most important graph what is the important node in the entire graph? And those are the like kind of picking the top 10 or so are what we're going to call our VIPs and try to measure in some meaningful way that these guys we think are the actual content producers on the forum. And once we have the VIPs, we can kind of correlate all our data from step 2, sort of the reduced list of kind of tokens and interesting words the VIPs are using, look for OPSEC fails there. And then finally, if we have, and we'll kind of talk about correlating images in this final step in the next slide or so, but basically finally once we have sort of the pictures of the VIPs, and if we're doing some image recognition, what we're going to do is run some of these deep learning algorithms, which we're going to talk about, to compute hashes, look for things like the traffic cam stuff, correlate even at a minimum level, like what country is this picture in? If we can do that automatically, that's already a win for law enforcement. And so I think the last, just one last little, do we still have time?
No, we need to wrap up.
Yeah. So let me just kind of tell this last little story here, just about like kind of the deep learning aspect for how we got exposed to something called PhotoDNA. And PhotoDNA is a Microsoft algorithm. This was at the original hackathon we were at, and basically this is the output of PhotoDNA for two pictures. Basically, the only thing different in the picture is like one little piece, and so you can see what PhotoDNA does is it computes a hash. This is sort of the PhotoDNA hash. It's just sort of like the representation of a matrix for each picture. And with this picture, what you can do. So here's just my childhood friend. His high school picture and his picture that was like on ESPN in a World Cup game. And these are separated by about 5 years. And what PhotoDNA lets you do when you get these two numbers, it lets us like get it's called a similarity metric. I can ask like how similar are two pictures, and in this case, PhotoDNA will tell us like there's like a 90% similarity of this person's actually the same person. And we saw the Microsoft team just kind of take this technology, and what they did at this time, they had about 6 months of backpage scrapes, and they had 5,000 missing persons reports from California. And so what they did was they took every picture in the missing persons report, correlated against a carefully selected subset of Backpage, and just with that 5,000, with those 5,000 images, just in that like 24-hour hackathon, they correlated to one person who had turned out ended up in another state. She was either kidnapped or a runaway, but they basically were able to take action on an open case, and it was just during a hackathon proof of concept, and it was using some of these. This is sort of really kind of where deep learning and a lot of these kind of things are very powerful in the image recognition case. And so those are mainly the two stories we want to say. Yeah, I want Rod to take over.
Well, thank you very much. Is there any questions? If not, then we'll see you next year, and thank you for an awesome conference. So I'll see you in London.